One person is at the center of the long-running conflict between Christianity and Judaism, Jesus of Nazareth. What do Jewish writings and traditions actually say about him? Well, history is full of debates, but few are as intense and long-lasting as this one. One question has caused religious division, innumerable debates, and even cultural shifts for more than 2 millennia. Why do Jews reject Jesus as the Messiah? What if rejecting Jesus isn't about a lack of faith, but a deeper, more complex understanding of messianic prophecy that many Christians overlook? People chosen by God, given prophecies and promises, are waiting for their deliverer. However, when he comes, they fail to recognize him. Sounds like a divine story twist, right? However, this is not fiction. Rather, it is a fact that has influenced religious history and continues to have an effect on our world even today. We'll examine the actual causes of this rejection, from ancient Jerusalem to modern Jewish communities. You'll find revelations that disprove presumptions, close gaps, and strengthen your faith by the end. Let's get started. To fully understand why the Jewish people reject Jesus as the Messiah, we must journey back to ancient Israel. The aroma of spices from busy markets fills the air, and everyone is talking about the expected deliverer. People are longing for a savior after being oppressed for generations by the Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, and now the Romans, and the streets are alive with anticipation. But not just any savior. Their Messiah was not supposed to be a kind spiritual mentor. Instead, they dreamed of a warrior king, a David-like figure, riding in on a war horse, sword in hand, prepared to destroy the enemies and bring Israel's glory back. Their hearts mirrored Isaiah's words. The government will be on his shoulders, as stated in Isaiah 9:6. This was not merely a wish for peace. It was a vision of political freedom and a powerful, prosperous new country. The Messianic age promised a spiritual renewal, in addition to political liberation. Imagine the words of the prophet Jeremiah motivating generations to come, a day when God would establish a new covenant and inscribe his law directly on the hearts of his people. Along with predictions of the return of exiles who had been scattered across the world and the restoration of temple worship, Jeremiah 31:31-33 showed profound change. These weren't just fantasies. They had their roots in millennia of history and prophecy, a tapestry of promises from God. The Jews carefully examined their scriptures, deriving meaning from verses such as Daniel 7:13-14, which described a person resembling a son of man, who would arrive with the clouds of heaven and be given power over all countries. They held to Zechariah 9:9-10, which described a virtuous king who would descend on a donkey and deliver salvation to Jerusalem. The catch is that the forecasts weren't taken at face value. The reality of Roman oppression influenced them and fueled their faith in a Messiah who would defeat the Romans and return Israel to its independence, a warrior monarch to free them from the bonds of their misery. That's why many people were dubious when Jesus arrived, preaching spiritual restoration rather than political revolution. His message did not align with the Messiah they had been anticipating, the one that appeared to be promised by their prophecies. This wasn't just about being stubborn or blind. It was rooted in centuries of theological understanding and a deep hope for national restoration. Hope for a national restoration brings us to the heart of the issue: the theological differences between Christian and Jewish interpretations of the predictions of the Messiah. There is a fundamental difference in how the same sacred writings are read, not just a difference of opinion. Consider Isaiah 7:14, which states that the virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and will call him Emmanuel. As Christians, we instantly associate this with Jesus' miraculous birth. However, the meaning is different for Jews. The word virgin is actually the Hebrew word alma, which means young woman. Jewish historians argue that this prophecy was a sign delivered to King Ahaz regarding the downfall of his enemies at the time, rather than a prophecy about a future Messiah. Isaiah 53 is another important prophecy. While Jews view the suffering servant as a metaphor for Israel's suffering, Christians see it as an indication of Jesus' sacrificial death. Similarly, Jews interpret Micah 5:2 as referring to the ancestry of the Messiah, whereas Christians see it as predicting Jesus' birth in Bethlehem. Jews interpret Zechariah 12:10 as a time for national mourning, whereas Christians interpret it as a prophecy of the crucifixion. The fundamental distinction is in what the Messiah ought to be: a political figure who brings peace, rebuilds the temple, and restores Israel. According to this viewpoint, Jesus did not fulfill these roles. Moreover, the notion of a suffering Messiah runs contradictory to Jewish theology, which emphasizes individual accountability for sin, and the notion of a divine Messiah calls into question Jewish monotheism. Jews would have to reevaluate their entire faith and traditions in order to accept Jesus, a complex theological division with profound historical roots. In order to comprehend the Jewish rejection of Jesus, we need to take into account the deeply ingrained Jewish identity that has been developed over many years of history, custom, and hardship. The Jewish people have preserved their unique identity for more than 4,000 years, despite oppression and dispersal. This identity is based on the conviction that we are God's chosen people, as stated in Deuteronomy 7:6. Jewish identity is strongly linked to practice, as the 613 rules found in the Torah influence daily living, familial customs, and communal ties. Christianity marks a substantial shift by emphasizing faith over law. Because Jews have always been under pressure to convert, frequently under danger of persecution, their adoption of Jesus feels like a betrayal of their ancestors. The Holocaust, a disaster that is still remembered today, has strengthened the Jewish people's resolve to maintain their identity. Many believe that adopting a religion associated with their persecutors is a betrayal of their duty to defend their culture and people. Jewish identity is based on shared history, culture, and ethnicity, in addition to religion. Accepting Jesus can feel like cutting off links to one's heritage, even for non-Jewish people. Jewish communities have a strong sense of purpose and belonging because of their communal identity. The Jewish vision of universal peace and national restoration contrasts with the Christian concept of personal redemption. Therefore, rejecting Jesus is a matter of upholding a hard-earned identity. To fully comprehend why so many Jews reject Jesus as the Messiah, we must examine a difficult period of history. It was a time marked by suffering and persecution, often at the hands of those who profess to be followers of Christ. This is a profound, communal trauma that has ingrained itself into Jewish identity rather than being a collection of separate episodes. Imagine that Jesus' disciples were merely regarded as a sect inside Judaism in the early days of Christianity. However, things started to change as Christianity grew and took over as the most popular faith. By the 4th century, the Roman Empire had made Christianity its official religion, and Jews became marginalized, and their faith was being attacked. The tension only escalated, resulting in severe consequences. For instance, the First Crusade in 1096 was a massacre of Jewish villages throughout the Crusades. While traveling to Jerusalem, the Crusaders turned their swords on the local Jewish community and presented them with the unreasonable choice of either conversion or death. The Crusades were not the end of Jewish oppression. Jews were targeted for violence when the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215 mandated that they wear distinctive attire to distinguish themselves. Hundreds of thousands of Jews were forced to convert or risk exile during the 1478 Spanish Inquisition. Jews were held responsible for heinous charges, including blood libels, that resulted in killings throughout Europe. Jewish settlements were extensively destroyed during the Black Death in 1349, when Jews were blamed for polluting wells. Martin Luther's later anti-Semitic writings stoked additional persecution even during the Reformation. This persisted into the modern age, when Jews in Tsarist Russia faced harsh restrictions and violent pogroms that led to the Holocaust. the most organized attempt in history to eradicate the Jewish people. During the Holocaust, 6 million Jews were murdered by the Nazi government and its allies, many of whom were Christians. Even if ties between Christians and Jews have improved since the 1960s, historical wounds still exist. The cross, which is a Christian symbol of salvation, has been a sign of horror for many Jews, who associate Christianity with centuries of oppression. The significance of preserving Jewish identity is emphasized by this tragic past, and for many, adopting Jesus entails siding with those who wish to exterminate or convert Jews by force. Honoring the memories of those who suffered for their faith and maintaining an identity that has persisted are more important than placing blame on contemporary Christians. Many Jews' rejection of Jesus as the Messiah is influenced by generations of suffering and oppression and goes beyond simple theological reasoning. However, attitudes toward Jesus are starting to change in the modern era. Jesus is still seen by the majority of observant Jews as a historical character, a first-century Jewish teacher who had an impact on world history but failed to fulfill the messianic prophecies. This viewpoint is summed up by well-known modern philosopher Rabbi Shai Botti, who claims that Jews reject Jesus because he didn't fit the requirements outlined in Jewish tradition. However, there is a growing interest in comprehending Jesus in the context of his Jewish heritage. Instead of accepting Jesus as the Messiah, scholars like Amy Jill Levine, a Jewish expert on the New Testament, study his life and teachings to gain a deeper understanding of the Jewish milieu in which he lived. Some liberal Jewish thinkers see this as a new approach to studying history, one that acknowledges Jesus' importance without accepting him as a spiritual leader. Rabbi Michael Lerner says that although Jews shouldn't believe that Jesus is God or the Messiah, they can respect him as a Jewish teacher who promoted moral monotheism. Like other significant figures, Jesus is only seen as a historical figure by certain secular Jews. Though mainstream Judaism does not accept it as valid, there is also messianic Judaism, which blends Jewish identification with the idea that Jesus is the Messiah. Though basic theological differences still exist, better understanding has been created in recent years by growing interfaith discussion. Due to past experiences, many Jews continue to reject Jesus, yet some Christians are beginning to appreciate Jewish viewpoints. Humility, transparency, and knowledge are essential for promoting understanding between Jews and Christians. Respectful discussion allows both parties to gain knowledge from one another without sacrificing their convictions. Peace can be established by tackling anti-Semitism, fostering friendships across religious boundaries, and concentrating on common ideals. By being patient and empathetic, we may overcome doctrinal differences and make the world a more peaceful place.